Welcome to Storied, the untold Jewish stories behind your favorite music. Season 1, The Beatles. This project started off as a live show created in partnership with the Berman Theater at the J Detroit, and has grown exponentially since then, including shows about other bands and other genres. Now we're doing this podcast where in each episode we're going to dive deep into the history and the legacy of most of our favorite band, and that is the Beatles, focusing on where Jews and the Jewish community contributed and collaborated to their stardom. Each episode begins with a recording from our live show telling a quick and high-level version of the story, followed by this episode, this deep dive really getting into it, as I interview some really special guests. It's no secret Jewish events today can be appropriately hard. We have some serious issues that we're grappling with as a community, and they often require a box of tissues and a therapy appointment afterwards. The Storied Live Show was conceived and developed at the J in Detroit in partnership with the Berman Theater, not as the answer to this problem, but as an answer to this problem. We are focused on a positive narrative, Jewish joy, and reminding people about the great contributions made by the Jewish community. We're excited to see Storied grow with this podcast and many more live shows. Now, you may be here because you're a Beatles fan, or you may be here because you're looking for positive Jewish content. In either case, our intent is for all of your delight, and I think you're going to get there. If you're watching this on YouTube, you see this awesome Storied shirt that I'm wearing, and it was designed and made by a sponsor of the show, Yonatees. Now, Yonatees makes awesome custom merch and some really great Jewish-themed merch, like the ones you're seeing popping up on the screen here. If you're listening on an audio feed, pop over to YouTube just to see what I'm showing you, because it's worth it, and I think you're going to like it. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, we would love to talk to you. Check out the links in the story notes, including our website, www.story.show, for more information about who we are, what we do, the other bands and genres we've covered, or how we can bring this live show to your city. If you like what we've done here, please leave us a review and maybe some stars. If you have any questions, hit us up on our socials. We'd love to hear from you. All the links, again, are in the show notes. And with that, let's get this show on the long and winding road. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 11 of Storied, the untold Jewish stories behind your favorite music. And we have a very special monologue to this episode. For the last month, I've been telling you that the episodes were recorded prior to 20 Live Hostages coming home. But this episode is with John Ondrasek, and this was a very personal interview. We talked about Alon Ohel and his relationship with Alon's family and the song Superman. And you're going to hear all about that, but I thought it was fitting to invite John back for this introduction. John, welcome back 2 months after we recorded this. How amazing is it that Alon is home and that the other 19 live hostages are home? I mean, this is what we were talking about a few months ago.
Yeah, it still seems surreal. It's truly, in my mind, a miracle. And I know for months, we've been talking, and of course we all say when they come home, all the right things. But I think if we were fully honest, if we would have been asked what are the odds that all of them will come home, I think considering the nature of Hamas, we thought that was very unlikely. So just incredibly grateful and thrilled for the families. Of course, it also makes you think of the families whose loved ones did not come home. So I think we think of them as well. Mm-hmm. But personally, knowing Edith and the family and speaking to her, again, it's a miracle. Benji, you've been working a long time fighting the good fight, and so have I and so many others. And I think we've earned this time to smile and celebrate this joy. It's been a couple years since we've had a reason to really smile, and this has given us one. Again, I still have goosebumps when I think about it, and of course now we're moving on to their lives after this horrible experience.
Yeah. So I just want to take a moment and just talk about this deal, right? So the last 20 live hostages came home, and that included obviously Alon, but it included Gali and Ziv Berman, who were brothers. It included Ariel and Daniel Cuneo, who were brothers. It included Avitan Or, who many people recognize from Noah Argamani's video when she was kidnapped. That was her partner. Matan Arganest, who was in the tank with Omer Natura, the American who was killed on October 7th, and so many others. I mean, Omri Matan, seeing the videos of him playing with his daughters was absolutely incredible. And I'm just, going through these names and thinking about the last couple of weeks of these beautiful videos. Guy Gilboa, Yosef Chaim Ohen, Eviatar David, who Eviatar David and Guy Gabor were best friends. And Eviatar, for those who don't recognize that name, he's the hostage who Hamas took a video of him digging his own grave and he looked like a skeleton. He's home
Yeah.
now with his family and they're able to
Mm.
eat meals together and have conversations. And, Ram Braslovsky, who gave an interview and just described just awful, awful torture and sexual assault and just some terrible things, but they're home and we can breathe.
Yeah.
And there were 28, I was going to say dead, but murdered hostages who were also supposed to be returned. As of today, we're recording on Sunday the 16th. There's still 3 left. And the fact that we've gotten down to that number, as you mentioned, is a miracle. And we'll just say their names so that it's out there. But it's Ron Gavili, Dror Oren, Sudisak Ranislak. And forgive me, I probably butchered that name, but it's 2 Israeli Jews and 1 Thai worker who was in Israel. I'm grateful that the number is only 3, but that's still 3 that need to come home. And the fight is not over until they're home.
Yeah,
So.
I think you said the word that I think for all of us who've been doing this for over 2 years resonates, and the word is breathe. It just it lifts your heart, and you know, for those of us like you and me who know many of the families, who've been working with the families, who talk to the families, who text with the families. Again, I think we all kind of feel part of that. And of course, the hostages don't don't know we exist, or and many of them still really don't know. And that's fine. That's great. But we can kind of share in that joy. And I do think it's allowed us to move on to another phase. I think we take this moment of joy, celebration. Our hearts are with Rachel Goldberg and all the families who continued to advocate for the hostages, even when their loved ones were murdered by Hamas. I mean, doesn't that show you the infinite spirit of humanity, and also the whole nation of Israel and the Jewish people around the world, that everybody can kind of take a deep breath, regather. I spoke to Edith just the other day, and Alon, as you know, had shrapnel in his eye since the day he was taken hostage. Of course, the Red Cross never visited him one time, but he had surgery on that eye, and that looks like it was successful surgery. And from what she tells me, he's doing as well as you can be. She said something that really resonated with me. She said, Alon still feels like he's 22 years old because they stole 2 years from him. So he still
Right.
feels like he's a 22-year-old boy, ready to do things that should have been doing the last few years. As you've seen him playing the piano, I've seen him playing the piano. So again, there's a lot of work that these families have to go through psychologically, certainly financially. In the big picture, I think, if you never believed in miracles, you probably believe in them now.
Well, that brings me to something that we talked about, which Alon and his family and many of the hostages' families are in a financial situation where the Israeli government has committed to helping them, but that commitment doesn't really cover everything that they need. And so Alon's family lives up north, but they've got an apartment in Tel Aviv so that he's close to rehab and close to the services that he needs. And so they're paying for 2 places, have the expenses are massive, as you can imagine. And so they have a fundraiser going to help his family for his recovery, for his ability to mend. And so we're going to put a link to that in the show notes. And anybody who's listening to this, if you have it in your heart, $18 makes a huge difference. The sole purpose of saying this is to say we want to help Alon's family. We want to help him heal, and we want to help his family transition as seamlessly and as easily as possible. And so please, if you can find it in your hearts, we would love that. I do want to get to the episode, so I'm going to make you blush for a moment. I usually do a long intro talking about who the guest that is being interviewed and what we're going to talk about. I'm just going to say that John Ondrasek is a musician. He's been a musician for decades, and we're going to talk about this in the episode, but you listen to his music, you know his music, you love his music, and you're going to get to know John on a personal level through this episode, and that's really beautiful. And so with that, let's get on with the show.
Thanks, Benji. Always a pleasure.
As the Beatles entered their final chapter in their career, a new figure emerged, the legendary Phil Spector. Known for his wall of sound production techniques, he was brought to England in 1970 by the Beatles' new manager, Alon. Spector's first collaboration with the Beatles was on John Lennon's solo single, Instant Karma, which climbed to number 3 on the charts. Impressed by his work, Lennon and George Harrison invited Spector to take on the daunting task of salvaging the Beatles' Let It Be recording sessions. Spector dove headfirst into the project, applying his signature production techniques and making significant changes to the arrangements and several sounds of the songs. His work on Let It Be was not without controversy, however, which it was Phil Spector, so it's not surprising it was without controversy. Some of the music critics, even Paul McCartney himself, were critical of Spector's approach, with McCartney particularly infuriated by the producer's overdubbing on The Long and Winding Road. Lennon came to Spector's defense in an interview with Rolling Stone. Lennon praised Spector's work, even saying, and please forgive me for using this language here, but Lennon said he was given the shittiest load of badly recorded shit with a lousy feeling towards it ever, and he made something great out of it. He did a great job. Those were Lennon words, not mine. Spector's collaboration with the Beatles didn't end with Let It Be. He went to work extensively with individual members of the band, particularly with George Harrison. Spector produced Harrison's epic solo album, All Things Must Pass, as well as the Concert for Bangladesh, the live album, and the film. He also worked with Lennon on the Plastic Ono Band and the Imagine albums, cementing his status as a key figure in the post-Beatles era. The first time that we did this show, a Beatles historian was in the audience, and he came over to me afterwards to give me his thoughts, and I asked him what he thought, and he said, well, you made a major mistake. I said, what was that? And he said that I didn't clarify that while Hey Jude was recorded during the Let It Be sessions, Phil and the Beatles released Hey Jude as a 7-minute single, which was the longest single to reach number 1, after which they included in greatest hits and compilations, but it was not actually on the Let It Be album. And I was like, okay, well, if that's the only inaccuracy that I have in the entire storied production, I'm doing great. But I wanted to correct that for anybody who may have misunderstood. In this podcast, I interviewed John Ondrasik from Five for Fighting. We talked about the two types of people in the world, the people who love John's songs and the people who love Paul's songs. And I said, that's not how you categorize people in the world. The way that you categorize people in the world is people who like the early Beatles pop songs and people who like the later Beatles experimental and introspective and drug-induced stuff. So we're gonna do a little experiment here. I'm gonna take out my phone and I'm gonna make a video that I'm then gonna post on Instagram. And I'm gonna ask you guys what you think. Let's give us an answer. Is it the early Beatles stuff or is it the later Beatles stuff that is the best? And then we're gonna give John a run for his money here. So you guys ready? Hey, John, I'm here at Storied, as I was telling you, and we're having this conversation. What's better, the early Beatles repertoire, the pop songs, or the later introspective ones? And there's about 750 people here who are going to help answer that question along with the amazing band. Say hi, guys. All right, so if you think that the early Beatles, the pop stuff, is the best, clap now. Not impressive. If you think that the later Beatles, the experimental stuff, the goofy stuff, the drug-induced Beatles is the way to go, clap now. I love you, John, but I'm sorry, you're wrong. All right. Thank you for indulging me in that fun little game. Feel free to come to the Instagram later and argue with strangers on the internet. It's truly a thrill. Speaking of the Let It Be sessions, I think that we're going to do a song from there. Alex?
Hey, before we get to this interview, I want to take a moment and thank our new sponsor, Tequila Kosher Spirits. And they make the kosher tequila that I am seeing popping up around Detroit. And if you know me personally, or if you follow my social media, you'll know that I'm sober and I don't drink. But when I go to different Jewish events and I hear this topic come up, everybody has really great things to say about it. So I'm excited that Tequila reached out and said that they wanted to sponsor the podcast. Every special Chaim deserves a special spirit, but finding high quality kosher spirits is near impossible. Until now. So we're introducing Tequila Kosher Tequila, the world's first Jewish-inspired tequila, celebrating culture, community, and tradition. Tequila is 100% kosher and 100% additive-free. Check it out at buy.tequilaspirits.com for a smooth tequila blanco and bold tequila reposado. Tequila, l'chaim like you mean it. The link is in the show notes. Now let's hear this interview. All right, we are live, not live to everybody else, but live recording now. And we've got John Ondrasik here, Five for Fighting. John, thank you for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Thanks for having me, Benji.
Absolutely. It's a thrill to sit here with you and talk about both the Beatles and music and your music. You and I had a chance to meet a couple months ago when your band was playing in Detroit. We got a chance to talk about the Beatles, and I'm really excited that other people are going to be able to hear these stories. Let's start off with how and why you love the Beatles. I mean, it's a beautiful story.
Well, my mom started me very young at the piano. Of course, it wasn't too long before you had the Beatles songbook, which was literally like a phone book. It was this big black book, and you started, kind of going through it. And I think, as many songwriters, not necessarily in the 70s or 80s, but today, the Beatles were such a foundation, for so many of us. I think we all kind of fed into one of two camps, of course, the Lennon camp or the McCartney camp. I was certainly in the McCartney camp, still am to this day. Certainly appreciate Lennon's genius and his rock and his edge, which I think was the perfect complement to Paul's, kind of melodic sing-alongs. But yeah, I think for me, besides the piano players, of course, Elton and Billy and those guys, for me as an influence, you gotta kind of start with the Beatles and those piano players, and there's a reason those songs still stand up today.
So I'm gonna push back on a argument that I tend to have with a lot of my friends. And you said there's a split between Paul McCartney songs and John Lennon songs. I find the split for myself. I love both McCartney and Lennon songs. My split is pre-Rubber Soul, the early, pop songs versus the later, more experimental, goofy, fun stuff. And I go for the later stuff any day of the week.
Well, and I always have to check myself because, George Harrison wrote some of the most beautiful songs in the Beatle catalog. When My Guitar Gently Weeps, go down the list. So, I think sometimes we forget about the influence of George in the catalog. Of course, as a musician, he was a wonder. But yeah, of course, of course you evolve, right? You evolve from She Loves You to Lucy in the Sky to Hey Jude, of course. And that was one of the beautiful things of the Beatles, of watching them kind of evolve. But I always tell this joke, in my keynotes. It's like, and the best thing about, I think, the Beatles is you had two of the greatest songwriters ever in the same band. And that competition, that maybe passive aggressive competition, and especially you can kind of, with Lennon being the curmudgeon and McCartney being the happy-go-lucky, bard, you have to imagine that, it pushed them both. And they didn't write the same songs. They didn't have the same edge. They didn't have the same kind of tone in their songwriting, in their messaging, in their lyrics. And so I think that was so helpful for them. And I just tell this joke, imagine, Lennon walking in one day and Paul's like, "Yeah, hey, man, just wrote this little song called Yesterday. Check it out," and Lennon being like, "It's all right, it's
It's
kind of
all
silly,
right.
but check out this, man, come together, dude. Check this out."
Right.
And Paul
Right.
being the passive aggressive one saying, "Yeah, Johnny, it's really good, right, mate? But just let it be, right?" So there had to be this amazing kind of dynamic. And then, of course, when they got together and commented on each other's songs, I love the story of Will McCartney with "Hey Jude," "The movement you need is on your shoulder." That lyric, as the story goes, as I heard it, that was just a filler lyric. He didn't have a he didn't. And as songwriters, sometimes we do that. We just have this kind of meaningless, goofy line in there because we need something to sing on our demos, and we go, "We'll fix it later." And Lennon
Mhm.
saying, "That's a beautiful line. You can't change that." So I
Right.
think that's an example of them editing each other. And it's great to have when your editor is someone that you respect and also, again, an elite songwriter. I think it made them both better.
Yeah, and Jonah Platt is one of the episodes we talked to him, and he was talking about the switch when they moved from McCartney Lennon on the early albums to Lennon McCartney, and the egos that sort of fed into this is how we do it, and now this is etched in stone from now on. It's Lennon McCartney. It's not McCartney Lennon. And I think John's excuse was, well, alphabetically it makes sense, and that
Whatever
was
it
clearly
takes.
the reason. Whatever it takes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's very funny. The other thing that you talked about with George Harrison and his songs, I love when you look at George Harrison's place in the Beatles, and for all intents and purposes, he really shouldn't have been in the Beatles. He was a kid when he joined, and really John and Paul said he's so good that he needs to get here. He needs to get
Mm.
into it. And he was this goofy kid who didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't cool. He wasn't worldly. He was the goofy virgin, and I
Yeah.
think there's a story I heard where they were staying in a hotel, and like Paul and John were giggling because they heard a woman with George, and George was like freaking, he was like, he was losing his virginity on tour, and they were laughing because he was a kid. But that really speaks to the heart of what this show is about, which is the collaboration and the contribution, and the idea that if you're good, it doesn't matter who you are or where you came from, contribute and and level up the game and what everybody's doing. And that's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing to me.
Yeah,
So,
of course, and of course, Ringo, filling out that magic is just another example. I mean, it's interesting in bands, and my band's a little different because it's really not a band. It's me and hired musicians. But, the simple act of changing drummers can be so huge to the sound. And it doesn't mean you need someone better necessarily or somebody more talented. Frankly, during the recording of Superman, my producer suggested to try a different drummer because he was much more simpler. He didn't have all the chops. He could just
mhm,
play a simple groove. So, finding Ringo with the little kind of, the little swing to it was again, it's obviously history, but going through, and finding what works. It's not necessarily the best player, the best singer. It's what makes the magic. And
right.
I think again, the Beatles were fortunate that early they found that very quickly, and again, it's why they're the Beatles.
Right. There's a simplicity and a beauty to having your style, and your style doesn't need to be, Neil Peart. Not
Yeah,
everybody needs to be that, and I think Ringo is the perfect example of mastering simplicity and doing it perfectly, and just filling in what needs to be played, and not shoving. There was enough ego in the room already. He was
yeah,
able to just play what needs to be played. And when you think about like that swing, that weird style that it's because he was a left-handed drummer playing a right-handed kit. And
yeah,
so he was fitting in, but
Kurt Cobain was a left-handed guitar player playing a right-hand guitar. Jimi Hendrix was a left-handed guitar player playing, and their sounds are so incredibly unique for that purpose. Now, Kurt was a fairly simple guitar player. Jimi Hendrix was not a simple guitar player. He was a master.
Yeah.
But that, that signature of just doing what needs to be played on the song. I think it's a John Coltrane quote, and I'm probably messing this up, so anybody who's listening who can correct my quote, you're free to message us and tell me that I got it wrong. But I think it was John Coltrane who said that the hardest part of playing a solo was editing out the things that didn't need to be there, and just playing the essentials, right? And that's Ringo. He was just playing what needed to be there.
Yeah, and I think, again, when you talk about producers, I know we're going to talk about producers in a little bit too. Part of production is reduction.
Right.
The greatest producers have space in their music. And of course, the Beatles, with George Martin kind of came up with, bouncing tracks back and forth on 2 tracks and all that stuff and new sounds and reverbs. But again, I think the greatest producers, I remember one of my the first record I ever did, Record Mezzo for Albert, was produced by a guy named David Segerson, who did the Tori Amos Little Earthquakes record,
Right.
which to me is one of the most beautiful records I've ever heard. And his whole thing was, we need to get out of the way of her voice and her piano playing in her songs. We don't need a ton of production. And reduction is the key to production for some records. And similar in songwriting too. It's for example, Superman is a very simple song, and it sounds like it's very easy to write. Maybe it is for some people. I mean, obviously for McCartney, songs just seem to like fall from the sky from
Right.
heaven. So you have these prodigy writers, but for most of us, we're chasing the kind of the simplicity that makes it sound like anybody can write it. And that's truly a craft and an art form. And for most of us, it takes thousands of songs to get a couple of those. But again, that's what separates the Beatles. Is it seemed like particularly Paul with his melodies could just kind of, pull them out of the sky whenever he wanted to. But again, they have a certain simplicity to them, even though some of them are very complex melodies, and some of them are very, especially as the Beatles evolve, complex, innovative productions. Which, of course, Phil Spector, who we're going to talk about, was, again, one of the groundbreakers.
Yeah. I'm not in any way, shape, or form comparing my dad to Paul McCartney, but strange backstory. So my father was a singer-songwriter in Israel in the 60s and 70s, and then his writing partner, who married my dad's sister, took those songs and started a band called the Diaspora Yeshiva Band. And those songs in modern Orthodox circles are famous. They're standards. You can go into a modern Orthodox synagogue on any Saturday and hear my dad's songs being sung, as part of the liturgy. And he's got a famous song called Pitchuli, which is from Psalms. And, my dad would play his shows and very much in this style where it was story song. He was always explaining what the song was about and how the song was written. And he said they were playing on a gig, the two of them, and they were, they had finished one song and were vamping, and they were trying to think of what to play next. And they were just, hanging out on this A minor G. They're going and going and going. And my uncle Avram looked at him and was like, sing something, and he was like, I don't have anything. And he just thought about like this psalm that he really loves, and it sort of popped out, and it is the biggest song that he ever wrote. It's the biggest song that the Diaspora Yeshiva Band ever recorded. And it literally popped out in a live setting, in a live show. And I was always amazed by that. And I don't know if you've ever heard of a band called Humphreys McGee. One of my favorite bands. They are masters of their craft. They're absolutely incredible. I can't talk enough about Humphreys, but I won't. But I'll tell you that they have live improvisations that then they go back and say, okay, that jam was good. We should take that section and turn that into a song. And so when they do live improvisations, when you see on their credits, if you see a song called Jimmy Stewart is just a live improv. This is the first time they've ever played this section or this song. And very often and numerous times they've taken that and turned them into songs. And so those Jimmy Stewarts turn into songs. And it's always incredible to be like, oh, I was there when that song was, made up on stage in front of 3,000 people. It's absolutely incredible. So big fans of theirs. So let's talk about producers. And you were talking about the simplicity. And one of the interesting things that I wanted to bring up was, Phil Spector was controversial, to say the least, as a producer, and then later in life, throughout his life, he was a slightly controversial figure. One of the things that he got was he was able to do a lot of overdubs and able to take recordings from the Let It Be sessions and then bring John back and say, let's overdub this and let's do this again and let's mess with it, much to the dismay of Paul McCartney, who was not happy with that, but Lennon was really a fan. To take another left turn for a moment and share a story. So in the grunge version of Storied, I talked about Butch Vig, who's the drummer from the band Garbage, but he was also a record producer, and he produced a bunch of the Nirvana albums. And he was trying to get Kurt Cobain to do overdubs, and Kurt was like, nope, simplicity is the king, and I only want to do it in single takes. I'm not doing overdubs. And Butch said, well, if it was good enough for John Lennon and Phil Spector, it's probably good enough for you. And Kurt said, okay, fine. And and that's how Butch was able to get that out of Kurt Cobain. So I just I don't know if you've ever heard that story.
I did not know that story. That's amazing. Yeah,
I love that. So, knowing everything you know about production, how do you feel about Phil Spector's manipulation? I don't mean manipulation, a bad word. I mean physical manipulation of those recording sessions and creating the sound that we ended up with.
Since I knew we were going to do this chat, I went back and listened to a few songs. Let It Be, the song and the record are probably, I don't know, well, particularly the song is very significant to me. I often just kind of bust into it, talking about jamming. I sometimes during a show, I just start playing it and the band falls in. And I had the incredible honor of singing Let It Be with Paul McCartney at the Concert for New York, which again is a wild story. I was, I had just had my first song kind of on the radio, and Superman was one of the songs that recognized the heroes of 9/11. And a couple months after 9/11, I find myself at Madison Square Garden, playing with all my living icons, including the most important person to me, Paul McCartney. It was his concert. It was his idea. He put it on, which to this day, I think was just incredible. So you play your song, and it's funny. I remember getting there, and they had the schedule of who's playing, and you're a little young, but it was like 4 hours long. It was live. There was tons of acts, and I kept paging through it, and I didn't see myself. And I'm going, thank goodness. I'm so nervous. I just want to sit and watch. And then I get to the last page, and it's like Mellencamp, Five for Fighting, Janet Jackson, Paul McCartney. I was right at the end. I'm like, oh no. So I ended up performing, and then going backstage, and then at the end they had basically was going to be like everybody was going to come out, and McCartney was going to play Let It Be. I was going to sing, and I'm in my dressing room going, oh, I can't wait to watch this. And John Bon Jovi and Melissa Etheridge kind of come in my dressing room, and they say, you got to come out and sing. I go, I'm not worthy. And they literally grabbed me and said, your song is the song for 9/11. You're coming. So find myself literally standing at a piano with Richie Sambora next to me, and there's McCartney sitting at the piano, and we sing Let It Be. And again, you still pinch yourself. But, when I went back and listened, I believe actually George Martin produced the single Let It Be on that record. And then Spector came in and, as you said, kind of tried to clean up the mess. I have to say, for me, Long and Winding Road may be, for me, my favorite Beatles song. And of course, Let It Be is really a McCartney record. I mean, the 3 songs on there that we know is Let It Be, Long and Winding Road, and Get Back, right? I didn't even know some of the other songs. So it's really a McCartney record. And of course, you have to remember, this is towards the end of the Beatles when there's a lot of tension and anger and frustration. So, everybody was unhappy. So I think probably some of Paul's feelings about that are just kind of natural with the end of anything beautiful like a marriage. But
Yep.
again, I think Long and Winding Road, the production is beautiful. It's the thing that Spector did, at least for that record, he didn't get in the way of the songs. The production was
Right.
there. It was this wall of sound, but he didn't get in the way of the song. It's still basically, you listen to it, it still sounds like, a piano vocal demo with some beautiful kind of coloring in the back that gives you this emotion of the songs. And also with, McCartney always had this kind of beautiful way of singing that it just sounds like one take because it's never perfect. It's never really in tune. And that's the magic of Let It Be, and I think Long and Winding Road, his ballads. He's a great singer, but he's not a great singer. You
Right.
know? He sounds so human. He can hit all the notes that I can't hit. Maybe I'm amazed, I can't hit those notes and I sing pretty high. So he's a great singer, but he's not a great singer. He sounds like all of us. And so I really love the production of that of that song and that record. It wasn't to me a huge throw from what George Martin does. And as far as all of the, bouncing and the songs and the sounds, in this day and age, we can't imagine not doing that.
Right.
So I think he did a great job. And again, Let It Be is just still iconic. It has the intimacy of that lyric. The Long and Winding Roads have the intimacy of the lyric, and part of it's the mix too. The mix is his vocals really loud and the piano is really
Right.
loud. These days that would never happen. You'd be really
Right.
hearing the strings and all that stuff. So again, for me, it's magic, and maybe I'm biased because I just love Paul and I love Let It Be. But I don't know. What's your opinion, Benji? What's your feeling? I mean, I know it was kind of the swan song for them, and you're really the Beatle expert.
Well, I feel honored that you called me an expert. I think I'm just slightly obsessed. I'll give you two answers. Okay.
Okay.
If you love the album, he did a great job.
Yeah.
Right. So if
Yeah.
somebody else would have done it differently, that's okay. And even though Paul says, I can't believe he messed with it, he did mess with it. But we love the album. Therefore,
Yeah.
we did a good job. If you said Let It Be was the worst album that the Beatles did and the sound was off, then you could argue that he didn't do a good job. But the fact is that we enjoy it. I don't know if you've ever seen a YouTube show called Drumeo. I'm not a drummer,
No.
but I stumbled across this drum. It's actually a drumming company. They have like an app that teaches you how to drum. And what they do is they bring a drummer into the studio and they play a song that the drummer has never heard before, and they play it without the drum track, and it's just the vocals and guitar and bass and piano. And then the drummer gets to create a drum section for this song. And I've seen some amazing episodes, and sometimes I'm like, how have you never heard that song before? So there's an episode where Mike Portnoy hears a Taylor Swift song for the first time and is putting Dream Theater style drums on a Taylor Swift song, and it's absolutely incredible. But you have like jazz drummers who are hearing The Police for the first time, and you've got rock drummers who are hearing different styles, and it's absolutely incredible. And what you realize is different people play different songs differently, and that's okay. That's their style. And so I think I love the album Let It Be. Therefore, in my opinion, he did a great job. I think the more important answer is George Harrison continued to work with him afterwards, right?
Right.
Phil produced All Things Must Pass. He did the concert for Bangladesh. He worked with John Lennon in the Imagine album and the Plastic Ono band. So like, it's not like he did a job and they were like, this was awful, you're out of here. He worked on
Right.
post Beatles albums, right? They appreciated what he was doing. So to me, that's the answer, right? Like, it's irrelevant what we think, whether he did a good job. The Beatles liked it and we liked the album.
Well, I
Enough
think
said.
too, yeah, I think again, and the challenge is especially for producers who like to use a lot of elements, a lot of sound, and maybe a little esoteric, is to recognize it's still about the song. It's
Mm-hmm.
still about the song. And you have, in my mind, one of the greatest songwriters of all time writing a couple of these songs. So you need to support the song, but stay out of the
Right.
way of the song. A producer cannot make a bad song good, but a producer can ruin a great song.
Hmm.
So I think for me, again, if you just listen to Too Long and Winding Road, he supported the song, and that's really your job. Support the song, maybe add some emotion, maybe, give it a lift here, pull it back here, give it some space here, give it some momentum here. And I think you hear that, with Harrison's songs too. And Imagine too. I mean, so I think he was wise enough to understand, yeah, I have these tricks, these sounds, but especially for those guys, let's let's remember, stay out of the way of the song and add your flavor. And again, I think that's probably what Lennon liked. He
Right.
liked, he was always a little more artsy and aggressive and willing to try things. So I could see how him liking that, but as long as it supported the songs, I could see why they enjoyed it. And also kind of George, he was so beautiful with his sounds. His sounds were always so beautiful. So I could see someone like
Right.
Harrison being so intrigued by somebody who was a master of sonics and sounds and new sounds.
Right.
Guitar players are always looking for the next coolest, greatest sound. And
Right.
they love to sit there for days, hours, weeks, months playing with their pedals and their sounds and their reverbs. And it's like, for them, that is heaven. So I could see that too.
So I have a theory. This is not substantiated. This is not. People are going to assume that I'm wrong. This is a theory. Okay. I wasn't there. So George Martin was the producer before Phil Spector. Okay. George Martin was also playing piano on the majority of the piano songs that the Beatles were playing. Right. In fact, I think the number is 20% of Beatles songs have George Martin accredited as a instrumentalist in addition to being a producer. Okay, so he played piano on those songs. At the end, George Martin's no longer the producer. He's no longer the piano player. Paul McCartney's now the piano player. And then Phil Spector shows up and he's messing with his piano sections. And my theory is that's why Paul didn't like him, because he was messing with his piano sections. He wasn't messing with his bass section. He wasn't messing with his vocals. He was messing with his piano sections. Am I right? I got no idea. It's my theory. It's my, it's my conjecture. But that's my thought on the subject.
I wish, I wish he would, give a little more detail. Again, if you're gonna mess with something with McCartney, it's certainly not his bass lines, because the dude, people give a lot of credit to Ringo, and Ringo deserves a lot of credit. Paul McCartney, in my mind, is the best bass player I've ever heard. Talk about
Mm-hmm.
melody on a bass and knowing when to stay out of the way. So again, piano. Again, they're very simple songs, so it's not like you're looking at Mozart, So, if you push a few piano sections around, it's basically da 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 da, it's not, Elton or again, even sophisticated piano players. But again, I when I listen to those parts, they're very simple parts. Maybe that's why maybe he simplified them. I don't know.
Right.
Again, at the end of the day, you listen to it and you're, as I said, they're classics, they're standards, they're amazing. And again, I also have to feel that, I've been in projects that are kind of at the end of the rope, right? And people have been working
Mm-hmm.
together for a while, and there's a lot of water under the bridge, and there's really nothing that'll make you happy. And especially if it was John's idea, Paul probably didn't like it, whatever John's idea was. So it's
That's
like,
well said.
if Paul had brought him in, John would probably be saying it's shite,
Right.
But
Right.
but we're just happy to listen and enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I did this show for the first time, there was a Beatles historian that came to the show, and he came over to me afterwards, and like he waited around till we were we were done, and comes over to me afterwards and says, "My name is so and so, and I'm a Beatles historian, and I saw that the show was being formed, and I came here just to see whether or not you did a good job." I was like, "Okay, how'd I do?" And he says to me, "You made one massive glaring mistake." I'm like, "Oh my God, what did I do?" And he says, "The song Hey Jude, which is performed after we do this story," he says, "Hey Jude was recorded during the Let It Be sessions, but it was not part of the album. It was recorded as a single, and it was a 7-minute single. It was the longest #1 hit that had ever been done." He goes, "And then it was put on the greatest hits and the compilation albums, and it's been on a dozen albums, but it wasn't on Let It Be, and you said it was on Let It Be." And I was like, "Okay, that was an inaccuracy." He goes, "But I'll tell you what, I was expecting you to make a whole bunch of mistakes, and that's a fairly nominal one." And I was like, like just wiping the sweat off my brow. I was really grateful that he wasn't there to beat me up. He was there to sort of pat me on the back. But that was the one when I was getting the script ready for our show next week. I made sure to correct that and say it right.
Well, it's
So
funny. It's funny. I always assumed it was. I mean, when I pulled the record up because I knew we were gonna talk, you kind of go up and then 9 songs are there and it says more, and I hit the more expecting to see Hey Jude, and I'm like, what? It- and I'd forgotten, but it makes sense. I mean, it fits right
mhm.
on that record. Again, that was a
Yep.
McCartney masterpiece record. So it's just, again,
Yep.
to me, you could take, it's so hard with the Beatles, but if you're going to take the top 5 McCartney song, I don't know, maybe top 10. Certainly, Hey Jude, Let It Be, and Long and Winding Road are in there. And for many
Yeah.
people, Get Back is in there. So again, he was at the height of his powers at that time. And I don't care what record it's on. I just love I just love to have it. And I love, look, we play Bohemian Rhapsody at the end of every show. So there's
Right.
maybe 3 or 4, songs that are 6, 7 minutes long that are hit songs on the radio in history. American Pie,
Right.
Bohemian Rhapsody, Hey Jude, that might be it. So
Right.
again, it just goes to his legacy.
Right. Well, I'll tell you. Speaking of your shows, let's talk about your songs and your shows for a minute. So, most people know the song Superman,
Yeah.
and it's been pretty incredible to to watch the evolution of what that song has gotten attached to. And you mentioned the 9/11, but before 9/11 it was Dawson's Creek. And I was in high school in the late 90s, and so I associated the song with Dawson's Creek. Guilty
Yeah.
pleasure, please don't give me a hard time about that. And then I was in college during 9/11, and I remember that clearly, and how the song got attached to it. And I watched the concert for New York on television. I remember, I mean, that was a very important moment in history. Seeing those people there. I mean, it was a core moment for you. It was a core moment for most people as well. And now, in the last 22 months since October 7th, Superman has been rewritten and associated with the still hostage Alon Ohel. Can you talk about how that association came, what that has meant to you, how that has grown and changed and evolved and done for your music?
Yeah, I mean, since October 7th, I've written a few songs kind of about the atrocities of October 7th and the world going crazy. First was a song called Okay, We're Not Okay, really talking about the kind of collapse of all the moral institutions in the world, the media, the UN, our college campuses, kind of taking the side of Hamas in this truly evil massacre on October 7th. Again, I'm not Jewish, but I kind of quickly found out what it's like to be Jewish in a small way in 2023, 24, 25. And that song became kind of a global statement that some appreciated and some didn't. And I also was able to go to Israel and perform OK and Superman at Hostage Square. Actually, was the night Iran bombed for the first time, so I experienced Israeli life in that as well. But
The
I
inside of a
got to be
bomb
very
shelter.
close. Yeah, I understood. Yeah, all that and this, basically this just the resilience of Jewish people. But I got to be close with many hostages and many hostage families. I was working with the Goldbergs, and when tragically Hirsch was killed, and I wrote another song called "Song for the Hostages" that I put out just to kind of keep the plight of the hostages, in the spotlight. And then a few months ago, Edith Ohel, Alon's mother, reached out and said, "Would you do something musically to again? We're kind of
Uh-huh.
getting pushed off the pages and kind of getting lost in the noise. And could you do something music to support my son Alon?" And I was aware of Alon, as you know, Benji. Alon's a great piano player. He's a musician. There's YouTube videos. He's incredibly talented. And in Hostage Square, there's a piano sitting there. It's called the yellow piano. It just sits there, and people can play it. When I was in Hostage Square, I sat and I played it. We have recordings of me playing Superman on it, and people just walk by and they're like, "Who's that weird guy playing that song?" And I didn't realize at the time that's Alon's piano. That's
Uh-huh.
his piano. And so when she reached out to me, she's like, "Well, what can we do?" And we were thinking about doing a collaboration, a new song. And then I thought about Superman, and I thought, of course, the most people hear Superman, they think of 9/11, they think of the concert for New York. I'm like, well, of course, for my Jewish friends, for the Israeli people, for the Jewish people, and for sane people, October 7th is really the 9/11 for the Jews. It was their 9/11. And I'm like, well, maybe in my head, I'm like, well, maybe we should do like a new version of Superman. And just kind of coincidentally, the next day, Edith sends me a picture of Alon at 8 years old in his Superman pajamas, right? So I'm like, that's pretty, the world, God is
Yeah.
telling us to do
Telling
Superman.
you something.
So we
Yeah.
did, so I changed a few lyrics to make it a little more optimistic. And I changed it to, find a way to fly to a home I will soon see.
Uh-huh.
Because that's what I believe will happen. And we recorded and we made a new video, a new song, a new version, produced a new song. And in the video, Edith, her other son Ronan, is sitting at the yellow piano playing Superman, surrounded by loved ones. And I'm singing the new version in a studio out here in LA with I did with some Israeli pals. And again, this song and video, I think, came out at the right time. It came out the same week as Coachella, which I was very pleased about because, of course, we know Coachella and Glastonbury was filled with anti-Semitic
Right.
hatred and
Kneecap.
Hamas love, and just, disgusting, the shameful nature of what the music business is today. But I was glad that Superman. Here's another point of view. Here's another song that you know. Here's a song that has the context of standing up against evil, and with a hostage family. So again, I just got off the road a couple days ago, and every night I kind of talk about it, and I play the new version. And as you said, you never know when you write a song what's going to happen with it. And Superman has had so many incarnations, and I'm very pleased and proud that it has this new sentiment. And again, the whole goal with this project and the song is the hope, prayer, and belief that one day I'll sit at that yellow piano with Alon and I will play a duet of Superman with him and his family surrounding us. And of course, recognizing all of the hostages who were frankly murdered and did not get home. So
Right.
again, that's the unique power of music, the unique power of song to make global statements in ways that no other medium can.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. Yeah, I can tell you that as both a music fan and somebody who's been advocating for the Jewish community for the last 22, 23 months, seeing an ally like yourself just put your chips on the table and say, I'm here to participate. I'm here to be a part of the solution. It's appreciated. It's noticed. It's a beautiful thing and won't be forgotten. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I wanted to ask you about in your show, and I was lucky enough to come to your show with my wife and my daughter, and at the Strand Theater in Pontiac, and we were surprised. The opening act is actually your daughter, and she blew us away. And when we got in the car, my 15-year-old said, "Yeah, that the main band was cool and all, but that opening band was awesome." Yeah, I'm like, okay, that's wonderful. Can you tell us about her music? We'll put a link in the show notes so that people can find it. But how awesome is it to go on tour with your daughter and have her play songs with you? Like, it's got to be the best. I want to hear from your words.
Of course, it's hard to talk about it without getting a little teary. My daughter's always been an aspiring kind of musician. She really was more of a theater kid. She went to all the theater camps and she went to NYU, to Tisch, theater school. But she's always been writing songs. She's always been writing in her journals and writing songs and making little demos and learning how to produce on her laptop. And at NYU, she met a friend named Caroline, who was a great little guitar player. And they started writing songs together. And of course, she started kind of writing songs on her own. And that's really become her passion. I think that, and certainly as someone who went through that, I understand that passion. I also understand the odds of having a career doing it. But so she has this folk duo called Lace and Lee with Caroline, where, as you saw, they opened for me. And again, they're very kind of bard-esque folk rock singers, and they write really fun songs and have fun stories. And again, for young, artists who've really never had much experience on stage, they bring the house down and they're a lot of fun and their songs are great and they sound great. And it's just, I think, partly it's their schooling, but also just who they are. And so it's wonderful to watch them. And they also bring the joy and the fear and the insecurities that we all had, right? So you kind of look at them and you understand when they walk off, they go, "Oh my God, I was flat on that song. I was terrible." Or, "Oh my God, I signed my first autograph," So all that stuff just makes the whole tour like we're all young. It makes us all young again. So that's
Yeah.
wonderful. But she also has her solo stuff, which again is very, it's very ambitious and it's not generic. And I kind of have this kind of tightrope where I let her work with producers. I don't try to oversee too much, but sometimes we'll sit and write a song together. And I have a song called "I Just Love You" that I wrote. Olivia kind of inspired when she was 4 years old and said, "I just love you, Daddy. I don't know why, I just do." That became a song, and that we've been playing for 20 years. And now she comes out and sings it with me at 23. And,
Yeah.
every night we do that, there's not many dry eyes in the house, and that's not going to be happening forever. And so I love this window where she can be with me as she kind of goes off into wherever she's going to go. And anytime you are able to do something you love with your child, especially, artistically, it's talk about nirvana. It's
Right.
heaven. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think she does a really amazing job. It's a great combination of powerful music, but it's intimate, and I love the storytelling and sort of like the behind the music that they bring to the songs and the show. They do a great job. So,
Thank you.
are you familiar with the term Jewish geography?
No.
Okay, so I'm gonna teach you about Jewish geography. So this common, almost every single time two Jewish people meet, they play a game called Jewish geography, which is, "Oh, you're from Toronto? My dad used to live in Toronto. My cousin still lives there. Do you know my cousin? And he goes to this synagogue." And you put the pieces of the puzzle together. "Oh, you grew up in Baltimore? I went to high school," and put the pieces of the puzzle together. And inevitably, it's a small community. It's 15 million people. It's a small community, and there's always some sort of connection, and we find those connections. And I don't know how or why it started, but I wanted to play some Jewish geography with you, but specifically storied Jewish geography. So I was in getting ready for the show, I was like, "Oh, we got to talk about this connection." So I'm gonna throw a whole bunch of Jewish geography connections at you. Okay.
Okay.
So we just talked about your daughter. and I read that you guys saw Wicked 17 times together before the movie came out.
Yes.
Jonah Platt was on this podcast.
Yes.
He's episode 8, and he played Fiyero on Broadway before the movie came out. And so I don't know for a fact, but I'm sure you were in the room and saw Jonah Platt do Fiyero in the Broadway production of Wicked. Do you know him at all? Do you know?
As again, I've been living Jewish geography because, as you said, everybody knows everybody,
Mhm.
and especially kind of here in California. I actually met Jonah at a press conference at UCLA,
Hmm.
talking about the anti-Semitism of UCLA. Again, I hadn't met him before. Since then, I've become very close with the family and his mom, Julie. But even to go down the rabbit hole, Stephen Schwartz, the iconic composer of Wicked and Godspell and Pippin,
Right.
is a dear pal of mine, and we've written songs together.
There you go.
We wrote Slice together. We've written, and we go to the U.S. Open together sometimes. It's like, but yeah, I love Jonah. Talking about a very successful family.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I love that one, and I love Jonah. I love his podcast, and again, talk about he's a great fighter for the Jewish people, just like you are.
Yep. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Next, we have your vocal coach for when you were a kid. So Ron Anderson.
Yeah, yeah,
So I was looking at his Wikipedia, and he coached Chris Cornell, who was
yes,
in the grunge episode of Storied. He coached Ozzy, and he coached members of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So all of those were talked about. Stories about them were in the grunge season of Storied, which is going to be season 2 of the podcast. But he also worked with Neil Diamond.
yeah.
And this is where we're gonna do a full circle. So Neil Diamond's career started with a guy by the name of Burt Burns. Do you know Burt Burns?
I don't. Yeah.
Burt Burns is the guy who wrote the song "Twist and Shout."
Okay. Know
So
that
Burt
one.
Burns was a songwriter, music executive. He wrote "Twist and Shout." He wrote "Cry Baby" and "Piece of My Heart" for Janis Joplin.
Wow.
He wrote "Hang On Snoopy," Sloopy.
Oh my God.
Um,
Yeah.
and he wrote about 20 other songs, but he got Neil Diamond. Sort of like the big breaks of his career was getting Neil Diamond and Van Morrison started. He found those two and got those guys. So episode 6 of this podcast or episode 6 of the season is interview with Brett Burns, who's Bert's son, and he talks
Mm.
all about those stories and just the insanity that revolved around all of that. So I thought you'd
Wow. I
appreciate.
can't wait to listen to that episode. Yeah. I mean, obviously, again, Neil Diamond's right up there talking about songwriters.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, Ron, I actually, with Ron, I was a huge fan of Steve Perry from Journey, like so many of us were back in the day. And I wanted to
Mhm.
find Steve Perry's voice teacher. And Ron had been working with Steve Perry, and it was so crazy because when I was going there, I was young, I was 17, 18, but he was working with all the rockers, Jack White from Great White, Don Dawkins, Axl Rose.
Mhm.
And so I'd go there, and I'd be sitting waiting for my lesson, and here'd be this flood of rock stars coming in and going out.
Amazing.
But again, what people don't necessarily know is many rock stars train classically. I trained as an opera singer. So I wasn't
Right.
going in there singing rock songs. I was training classically. I was singing operatic, and many, Freddie Mercury, go down the list. Many not necessarily all of them. Ozzy's not singing Mozart, but
Right.
so much of our training was operatic training, and that's what he was doing with all these rock stars. Because it's not just the voice; you have to have the ability to do that night after night after night after night after night.
Right.
So yeah, I was really fortunate to find, a guy who was training, the biggest stars in the world, and I give him a lot of credit for kind of my voice holding up, till 60 years old.
Well, I'm I am not a good singer by any stretch, but I love doing it. So,
Yeah, well, that's what's
one
all
day I'll make
about.
you laugh. So, all right, we're gonna wrap up. I got two questions, and this is sort of the way that I end off every episode. So the idea of storied really comes from the not the idea, but the reality that Jewish events are hard today. It's appropriately difficult, right? We're talking about hostages. We're talking about death and sexual assault and amputations and PTSD, and it's hard. And I tell people, you go to a Jewish event today, you need a box of tissues and a therapy appointment afterwards.
Yeah.
But my late father, who I mentioned earlier, my late father used to say that if we only talk about Holocaust education and the Yiddish expression, it's hard to be Jewish, why would our kids stick around, right? We
Yeah.
need to bring those the Jewish joy, and October 7th only made that problem worse. So Storied was sort of birthed as a place to find and really lean into the Jewish joy and focus on the collaboration, the contribution. So, number one, when you think contribution and collaboration, as we've been talking about today, where do you see the Jewish community collaborating and contributing and being a part of the arts, the solution, whatever? What is the great Jewish contribution or collaboration that you see today?
Well, I'll tell you what it is for me. And certainly
Uh-huh.
there's, incredible Jewish artists, scientists, philanthropists, go down the list, and you talk about, but I had a very, I think, empowering experience. We talked about when I went to Israel to play hostage tours. First time I've been to Israel. And I mentioned that was the night that Iran
Uh-huh.
bombed. And I learned a lot about the Jewish people that night. We were, of course, we were kind of nervous. People were talking about the bombing throughout that whole week. And when I played Hostage Square that night, when I came off stage, the leader of the hostage forum, Rebecca, said, "John, you need to be in your hotel room in the safe room by 11 o'clock tonight." I'm like, "Oh, really?" She's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Well, how about not? How about let's just go right now?" She's and she, it was about 8 o'clock at night. And I went to my Jewish friends and I said, "You guys heard, right?" They're like, "Yeah, yeah." And we kind of knew it was going to happen. I said, "Well, let's go to the hotel. Let's go to the safe room." They're like, "John, you don't understand. I have dinner reservations." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're funny, right? Ha ha ha, you're funny." He's like, "No, I'm serious. I waited 2 weeks for these dinner reservations." I'm like, "You're crazy." So we kind of arm wrestled for a while. We said, "All right, let's just go have dinner at the hotel." So we go to the hotel. Now it's like 9:30, 10, and everybody's drinking and, talking and laughing and having fun. And I'm sitting there like looking at my watch, and my son was with me. And I'm like, "You guys, you know what's going to happen?" And they're like, whatever. So it's 10:30. I go, "All right, I'm going up to the safe room. Let's go." They're like, "We'll meet you up there." And 11 o'clock, literally 11 o'clock on the dot, Iran launches the first drone, right? The drone attack. So I call down, "Hey guys, Iran launched their drones." And they're like, "Those drones take 8 hours to get here. Come on down," and they're just partying and drinking. And finally, so we go through the whole night. And of course, my wife's freaking out, calling me. Everybody's crying, freaking out. And I wake, we go through the bombs and everything. And you wake up the next day. Well, we didn't sleep, but here comes the next day, and people are on the beach playing volleyball. They're out swimming in the ocean. They're going to work. The restaurants are all busy. And I remember talking to my wife. I'm going, these people have a way to find joy and live life in the darkest times. And if I take
Uh-huh.
anything from what I've been doing in this experience, that's what I want for my life. And I'm so glad my son saw that. So I think the lesson I've received from the Jewish people is that exact point, that you can find ways that find joy and love and in the darkest of times. And I think that's why one reason why the Jewish people persevere and why they always end up winning these wars. And I've put that into practice in my life. I have a song called 100 Years. It's about live in the
Right.
moment, appreciate the
Right.
moment, even if it's not the greatest moment. And the Jewish people have really taught that to me as a person. So, that talk, we're all, I'm not doing this for religion. I'm doing this for humanity. And I think the Jewish people are giving us a lesson in humanity, in love, in life, and appreciating life. And for me, that's the collaboration that I'm most grateful for. That you and your fellow Jewish people and those who support you, you know, they remind me that life is fragile and there are terrible things that happen, but you have to live and find joy and surround yourself with loved ones. And I can't think of a better gift than that.
I love that answer. That is perfect. And it's actually the perfect parlay into the second question, which is, I use the term Jewish joy. When you hear Jewish joy, some people talk about Friday night dinner with the kids, right? With their family.
Yeah.
When you hear the term Jewish joy, what does that mean to you?
You know, a few months after October 7th, I was invited to go speak at a Stand With Us event. And they had brought in kind of teenagers and college students from around the world, 500 of them, to LA, and to talk about all the anti-Semitism that was raging on the campuses. And of course, October 7th was still very fresh, and we were all kind of dark and down and stoic. And so the first thing I did when I got there, they go, "Oh, come with us," because it was the Sabbath, and they were were coming into the evening of the Sabbath. So I go into this big ballroom, and there's probably 1,000 kids and then kind of adults and whatever. And they start doing this kind of celebration and this dancing. And then they play One Day from Yahoo, and everybody's in circles, dancing, hugging each other, running everybody's in a big line. They pulled me in, I'm holding hands. We're doing this big circle. Everybody's singing and dancing. And I'm like, this joy during these times, during what these kids are going through, really being pariahs on their own campuses, and everybody's singing and hugging and singing this song about hope. I'm like, wow, And so that was just my first kind of taste. But yeah, Jewish joy is just, again, I've put, the Sabbath in practice in my house. Yeah, look, you guys have Thanksgiving every Saturday,
Right.
what's better than that? And I think it's critical. We live in these days where families are scattered. We're all on our phones. We never sit together. We never talk to each other. Kids can't even relate to each other. But to have that once a week, Thanksgiving once a week, talk about a really powerful kind of strategy and tool for keeping priorities in order and being with family members. Again, you guys got it right, dude. I'm just telling you. And we try to pick and choose whatever we can to kind of hop on that bandwagon. So it's a long answer, but I try to fill my life as much as I can with Jewish joy.
I love that. I love that. Well, just so you know, you are the second person so far who has included the Modest Yahoo song One Day, singing that together as part of the answer. So, John, I can't thank you enough for being here and participating in this. And I'm looking forward to seeing you many more times and collaborating with you and contributing and being a part of the solution. So thank you.
Let it be. Let it be.
Let it be. Let it be.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's our show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe and leave us a review. It helps the algorithm show other people this podcast. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, again, reach out. We would love to talk to you. And make sure you check out the show notes for the links to our socials and our sponsors. This show was produced by Ryan Storm from This Is Storm Sound, editing done by Andrea Rizzuto, production management done by Eric Nelson, booking by Leanne Deutsch of 16 Mile Talent, design work done by Tessa Hewitt, research done by Avishai Bauman. Now, the music you heard is recorded by Evan Sherman, but was actually written by my late father, Rabbi Yosel Rosenzweig, as the original opening of the song that he wrote for the Diaspora Yeshiva band called Pit Huli. I'm your host and storyteller, Benji Rosenzweig, and this has been another episode of Storied, the untold Jewish stories behind your favorite music, Season 1, The Beatles.